There's a moment leaders recognize, but rarely name. You're in a meeting, or looking at an email, or staring at a decision that should take 30 seconds, and you feel it, that small, quiet hesitation. Not because you don't know the answer, you do, but something inside you is negotiating, weighing, rechecking, preparing an explanation you haven't been asked for yet. That's not overthinking, and that's not imposter syndrome. That's not a productivity system. That is internal negotiation. And if you don't understand what it actually is, it will slowly make leadership feel twice as expensive as it should. Now, from the outside, nothing looks wrong. You're performing. You're respected. Results are landing. People rely on you. By every external metric, things are working. But internally, something is off. Decisions feel heavier than they used to. Simple calls require more preparation than they should. You catch yourself rehearsing conversations before they happen and rerunning them after they end. You find yourself managing other people's reactions before you've said the thing. This isn't failure. It's a very specific pattern, and it has a name. It's called internal negotiation. Internal negotiation is what happens when part of you wants to decide and another part of you is quietly lobbying against the decision. Not because the decision is wrong, but because some older agreement you made with yourself is still running in the background. An agreement about what a good leader looks like. An agreement about who you're allowed to disappoint. An agreement about how much certainty you need before you're allowed to move. Most leaders don't notice these agreements. They just notice the effort. An effort, when it's not warranted by the decision in front of you, is almost always a signal you're not deciding. You're negotiating. Now, this is important because most people confuse this with indecision. And they're not the same thing. Indecision is when you don't know what you want. Internal negotiation is when you know exactly what you want and you're quietly trying to talk to yourself into being allowed to want it. You already know which hire is right. You already know the client isn't a fit. And you already know the direction the business needs to go. You already know the conversation you need to have, but you're waiting. You're waiting for more data you don't actually need. You're building a case for a verdict you've already reached. You're crafting language designed to soften something that doesn't need softening. And that's the tell. When a capable leader spends more energy preparing to decide than it would to just decide, something is being negotiated internally. And whatever is being negotiated is almost never the decision itself. It's permission. Permission to disappoint someone. Permission to be direct. Permission to change your mind. Permission to move before everyone agrees. Permission to stop carrying something you've outgrown. And here's the part that surprises people. The more successful you become, the more internal negotiation you tend to accumulate. Because every role, every relationship, every expectation you've taken on brings its own quiet clause. And over time, these clauses pile up. You're not leading one decision. You're leading a decision plus every unspoken agreement attached to that decision. That's why it gets heavy. Let's talk about what this actually costs, because leaders tolerate this pattern for a long time before they address it. And part of the reason is they don't see the full price tag. Here's what internal negotiation actually takes from you. First, it slows execution. Not dramatically, but just enough. A decision that should take an hour takes 3 days. A conversation that should happen Tuesday happens the following Monday. Multiply that across a year of leadership, and you're not losing productivity, you're losing seasons. Second, it dilutes authority. When you hesitate on things you already know, the people around you feel it. They may not articulate it, but they start waiting longer to bring you decisions. They start hedging their own recommendations. They start matching your uncertainty back to you. Your team's pace begins to mirror your internal friction. Third, it erodes trust in yourself. And this is the most expensive one. You're teaching yourself that your own judgment isn't quite enough. And the cumulative effect of that over years is a leader who has all the external evidence of competence and none of the internal conviction that should come with it. Fourth, it corrodes momentum. Real momentum isn't produced by effort. It's produced by a sequence of clear decisions. When decisions are clean, execution compounds. When decisions are negotiated, momentum has to be manufactured again and again through force of will. And that's what effortful momentum feels like. Everything still works, but it costs more than it should. And none of this shows up in the P&L. None of it shows up in your calendar. It shows up in how tired you are on Sunday night. It shows up in the decisions you keep postponing. It shows up in the version of yourself you meet at the end of the day. So where does this negotiation actually live? Because if you can locate it, you can resolve it. It almost always lives in one of these three places. Place 1, a role you've outgrown but haven't released. Maybe you're still operating like the person you were when you started the company, or still leading like the person who had to prove themselves 5 years ago. The role worked then. It doesn't fit now. But until you release it, every decision has to pass through it. Place number 2, authority you've been outsourcing. Somewhere along the way, you gave certain decisions to other people, a partner, a board, a mentor, a market, a version of what people expect. That outsourcing was probably appropriate at the time, but if you're still outsourcing authority on things, you're now fully equipped to own every decision, and that territory will feel heavier than it should. Place 3, an obligation disguised as a value. This is the hardest. It's when something you think is a principle is actually just a rule you absorbed and never examined. I don't disappoint people. I don't change course publicly. I don't make decisions without consensus. Sometimes those are values. Sometimes they're inherited weight. When leaders map where internal negotiation lives, they almost always find it concentrated in one of these three areas. And usually, one of them is the dominant one. The work isn't to become a different person. It's to stop leading through agreements that no longer belong to who you actually are now. Here's what changes when internal negotiation is removed. Decisions stop being events. They become a function. You decide the way you breathe without ceremony. The space that used to be occupied by weighing and rechecking becomes available for actual thinking. Your pace changes, not because you're moving faster, but because you're no longer dragging a second conversation underneath every decision. The people around you feel it before you do. They start bringing you cleaner problems because they sense you'll give them cleaner answers. Your team's decision velocity rises, and you didn't have to manage it. You just stopped modeling hesitation, and something quieter happens to you. You stop performing leadership, and you start inhabiting it. And there's a difference. Performed leadership is exhausting because it requires an audience. Inhabited leadership, it doesn't. It holds up in the room, and it holds up alone. That's what leaders actually mean when they say they want leadership to feel lighter. They don't want it to be easier. Leadership is never easy. They want it to be honest. Because honest leadership without internal negotiation, costs roughly what it's supposed to cost. Nothing more. If any of this is landing, if you've felt that specific way of deciding things you already know the answer to, here's what I'd offer. Don't treat it as a performance problem. You don't need more discipline. You don't need a new system. You don't need to push a little bit harder. Treat it as an agreement problem. Somewhere you're leading through an agreement that no longer fits. Find it, name it, and ask yourself a single honest question. Is this still mine? If the answer is yes, good. Lead from it with full permission. If the answer is no, you don't have to replace it with something louder. You just have to stop routing decisions through it. And that's the work. It's not dramatic. It's precise. And once it lands, you stop asking, is this the right call? And you start moving. Leadership doesn't need to become easier. It needs to become honest again. And that's where momentum returns.